What can I say about the things I most value? Things I carry with me everywhere. Things I cannot bear being without. And there are many things I've learned to be without. But these, when I have to leave, they're the first I bring, not because of worth, but because of what they mean. They're really all I have left of the women they come from, how they saw the world, how the world saw them, and most importantly, the things they wanted remembered about themselves. And if, God forbid, earthquake, fire, or flood should take them all away, I'd be left with nothing but my name and DNA. It all started with my name, my middle name to be exact. My name is Lydia Evelyn, and I vividly recollect when, as a little girl, my dad turned on a movie called The Princess and the Goblin. In the attic of the castle lived neither fairy nor witch, but a being no less mystical to my vibrant interior world, the princess's great-great-grandmother. They shared the exact same name, the grandmother said, and were connected by a magical invisible thread. Here my dad interrupted to say that I was like the princess, for I myself had a great-grandmother, and I was named for her. He said nothing of an enchanted connection, but I knew it must exist, for the princess in the story had one, and I was just like her. I wouldn't learn until later that all little girls have great-grandmothers, 4 to be exact, and many of them share names. To me, it was something special, so I looked for the thread that ran from her to me. First, I inherited my name, of course, then a locket from my great-aunt Sharon, engraved with my great-grandmother's initials, E.B., and a baby photo of her wearing it. Presenting it to me, my grandma said I'd have to find a husband whose last name started with B, so I could share not 1, but 2 initials with her mother. Then my older sister gave me, on my sweet 16th birthday, one of Evelyn's teacups and saucers. And my grandma passed on a collection of photos and mementos. She also tried to procure, but was unsuccessful, an interview with her mother conducted by a cousin, which made her wonder. All of my gift givers knew Evelyn better than I did, and I was a little jealous, wanting to know more. I knew she was Evelyn. Like me, she had 3 sisters. I didn't know much about them, except my mom said they were close, and they had something called zest for life. My lack of information didn't stop me from committing them to stories of my own invention, unlikely tales of a rebel alliance between Evelyn's family and her husband in the wake of Nazi Germany. My stories grew slightly more realistic when I asked for and received memories of taking turns with her 3 sisters at their console radio and Sunday picnics at the beach. It sounded so romantic, and from this I derived a happy childhood. With the help of my grandma, I later learned that Evelyn, too, shared a name with her mother and grandmother and great-grandmother, though not the name she shared with me. She was Evelyn Teresia, daughter of Anna Teresia, daughter of Teresia, daughter of Teresia. I found the 1930 census all on my own, and it shows Evelyn working at her father's hardware store. But late that summer she married in Elkhart, Indiana, 100 miles away from home. Whose idea that was and why, I can only guess. I believe she told my sister once she'd have liked to have been a beautician, but her father wouldn't allow it. Perhaps she was running away. Nope. There I go again, to the realm of mythologizing. Evelyn was real, and I will never know all her stories, no matter how much I wish differently. The things she did not say, I too will leave silent, in honor of the thread The thread that runs from her to me, the one that had our name as part of it. That share in her, however small it may be in reality, looms large in me. If I'd been named Lydia Irma, which couldn't have happened as my mom didn't know the name, she thought it was Sarah until I was a teen when she sat across from her mother at the little table in the kitchen on Clinton with a paper and a pen to take down her mother's parents' names and vital dates. She did it for me. She knew I was curious, and I still have the paper that taught me. My mother's mother lost her mother at 16 to diabetic shock. A reminder now that I am not invincible. I digress. I was not named Lydia Irma, but if I had been, maybe I'd have pictures and stories of her and Margaret Jane, affectionately called Jenny, and Elizabeth Ann, or Mary, Rebecca, or Catherine, or Rose, or Nora. If I'd been named Lydia Virginia, which wouldn't have happened, even though mine is the first generation in 3, the name hasn't been present. It was first passed from my mom's paternal grandmother to her aunt and finally to her younger sister, and I suppose her relationship with none of them warranted its passage to me. Again, through my mother's intervention, this time via email to her father, I learned Virginia Rose was born in Youghal, Ireland, the nearest of my ancestors to come to America, but her son was tight-lipped about anything else. I digress. I was not named Lydia Virginia, but if I had been, maybe I'd have pictures and stories of her and Ellen, affectionately called Eiley, and Mary, or Catherine, or the other Mary, or Bridget Margaret. If I'd been named Lydia Edith, which didn't happen and I couldn't tell you why, outside of the fact that my dad spent more time with his maternal grandmother in Ohio, and quite naturally, I think, more of his interest was vested there. Being a daddy's little girl and eager to please, naturally or not, where my dad's interest went, mine usually followed. So I learned about Edith later than the rest, too late to learn about her from the ones who knew her best. But I found in the public record her biological father passed when she was 3, and her mother Maud, a young mother of young children, remarried quickly and likely out of necessity. Later, when Edith's own husband left her a widow, she was older than her mother was upon her father's death, as were her children. She didn't remarry, and who knows why, but perhaps her own situation wasn't as urgent. I digress. I was not named Lydia Edith, but if I had been, maybe I'd have more pictures and stories of her, and Maud, and Emily Jane, and Harriet, or Mary and Lucinda, or Harriet Emmeline, affectionately called Hattie, or Elizabeth, or Lucy, or Charlotte Ann, or Anna, or Pally. Or maybe I wouldn't, after all. I am Lydia Evelyn, and I still don't have all of the pictures and stories of all the Teresias or Bernardinas or unknowns of the branch of the family tree from which I did inherit my name. Maybe the women I can't see never had their photos taken or never had their short stories shared, or maybe, regardless of my name, I was never in line to receive them. But I will never not feel the loss of the women I come from that I don't know. If I'd been named Lydia Irma, which couldn't have happened as my mom didn't know the name, she thought it was Sarah until I was a teen when she sat across from her mother at the little table in the kitchen on Clinton with Honestly, genealogy doesn't interest me that much. The pedigrees, cold and distant realities of a person's vitality, names of who they came from and when and who came from them always leave me longing for more. Mary Jane, Anne Maria, Emily Jane, and Harriet Emmeline were all women of pedigree, interwoven and overlapping. For better or worse, they are the daughters of women who carried, nurtured, and raised a revolution in new empire. Facts are, if I wanted to say join the DAR, I could easily do so through my connection to any one of the 4 of them, but that's not what I want. Having faces to go with their names and dates and places in the pedigree helps some, but it's still not what I'm looking for. I could say I want to know their stories, but even that isn't quite it. You see, I want to know them. It's impossible, I know, less possible still, because I never knew anyone who knew any of them. Still, I scour each step of the pedigree, the names for meaning, the dates for context, and I study the lines on their faces, the lights in their eyes, for traces of what their lives may have meant to them. I can't know how Mary Jane felt about the movement of her life from New York to Illinois to Iowa, what say she had in it. I can't know what she left behind in each place or how she dealt with that loss. I can't know what she thought, giving her 19-year-old daughter Carrie as the second wife of a man 13 years Carrie's senior, or when they moved away. I can't know how she received the news when Carrie passed 12 years and 4 children later. I can't know how she felt, what she thought about any of it when she passed herself some 8 months later. I can't know, but I can imagine. I can't know how Anne Maria felt when her husband and 8 of their 10 children preceded her in death, 7 in infancy and childhood, 4 of them her only daughters, Emily Maria, Emily Ann, Mary Elizabeth, and Emma Maria. I can't know how she felt burying her 2 infant daughters in Portland, Maine, before being pulled away by her husband's family to the Illinois prairie, then losing the 2 daughters who survived infancy within months of each other upon their arrival. I can't know what she thought of the Illinois prairie compared to her native coastal Maine. Most of all, I can't know if any of it was worth it to her. I can't know, but I can imagine. I can't know how Emily Jane felt marrying a man 21 years her senior at 18 years old. I can't know what prompted that decision, or if it was a decision at all. I can't know, but I can imagine. I can't know what drove Harriet Emmeline to leave her family and home in upstate Denimora, New York, for a farmer west of Lansing who she'd likely never met, or if she ever looked back. I can't know how she handled the losses of her life, her mother at 14, children at 26, 30, and 36. I can't know if she enjoyed farm life, or if it was only all she ever knew. I can't know, but I can imagine. I can imagine, because I do know what it's like to move from place to place and then be left behind. I know what it's like to be homesick and hate the place you're in. I know what it's like to not have a say. I know what it's like to lead the way and venture places unknown. Probably most importantly, I know what it's like to go there all alone, because sometimes others can't go with you and other times they simply won't. I want to think that makes me like them, even in small ways, because that means if they could live this life with all its change and uncertainty and loss, I can live it too. In case you didn't realize, I am a storyteller. It's not surprising, really, given the long line of them I come from. They date back to my 3rd great-grandmother Mary, as far as I can tell. And though I didn't know her at all, I learned about her and her stories from someone who did. I didn't know him either, Mary's youngest child, but he wrote her stories down, mingled with his own. Someone passed them to my grandma, and she passed them on to me. Mary told her youngest child, and he relayed to us, how the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 burned out the family-owned grocery store, sent them out of city limits to the prairie before rebuilding, and the assistance that was offered wasn't to her liking. She also told him about the man who swindled her husband out of his shares in a sawmill where he'd lost an eighth of a finger. She didn't offer specifics of how her husband then broke this swindler's spirits, reducing him to a vegetable peddler near where they lived at 67 Vetter. But knowing as I do the temperament on that branch of the family tree, I have no doubt it happened exactly as she said. She told him of her mother, but nothing very much, just that she was diminutive and suffered from a hunch. About her mother-in-law Felicitas, he knew considerably more. She lived with them, after all. She came from Germany in her early 40s with 2 sons in their teens. Neither Mary's son nor any record I've seen show if Felicitas' husband was with her or if she brought their boys on her own. I'm not sure exactly what brought them here or how they made it in those early years. Mary's son would speculate, and I would concur that a measure of wealth likely played a role. However they came, where they came to be, Felicitas lived a long, full life, but lost vision in both her eyes, after running afoul of a splinter, and eventually succumbed to gangrene, which certainly explains this branch's preoccupation with safety. Mary also came from Germany when she was only 7. She spoke Low German and was Protestant, while she married a man who spoke High and was Catholic. They baptized their children Catholic but raised them Presbyterian, presumably so all bases would be covered. The only tension it might have caused was when her husband died. He was buried in unholy ground because a priest was not around. It was 6 months before one would become available, and when the time came to consecrate the earth, Mary was unbothered. If it didn't matter 6 months ago, she reasoned, it wouldn't matter now. What her husband would have thought, I guess we'll never know, but being who he was, I doubt he would have been happy. As so many mothers are, Mary was the thread that bound her children together. Without her, they drifted apart, and I'm willing to guess the ones without families of their own were the ones who felt it the most. I don't see myself in her, but I think I see my mother in her pragmatism. Even though they weren't related, I think most probably they would have gotten along. I'm projecting, as all good storytellers do, at least the ones I come from, like my grandma, Marcia Lee. I was told when I was young that I was Irish and German. Imagine my confusion then when my grandpa talked of his ancestors from Wales and Scotland. I thought we were German, I said, because I already knew my mother was the one from whom all Irish flowed, and before my grandpa could say a word, my grandma dubbed me her favorite grandchild. As it turned out, she was the German one, while my poor grandpa was only Scottish and Welsh. I hadn't realized I could be more than just two things, or that there were some things one didn't want to be. I was only repeating what I'd been told. My grandma maintained her German identity all throughout her life, but just as I was more than two things, she was more than one. Nestled in a seldom talked about branch of the family tree was her paternal grandmother, and her roots were not in Germany. No, Ethelnina, affectionately known as Nina, was the daughter of Puritans, pilgrims, patriots, and pioneers. My grandma never mentioned that. Perhaps she never knew, or perhaps if she had, my grandpa and her children would never let her hear the end of it. Regardless, she shared her stories with me and helped me find my own in the summers at the blue farmhouse we rented on 68th Street. She told me and a sister who was learning to quilt about her grandmothers and how they both could sew. One relied on patterns, but the other just knew what to do. My guess is that Nina was the one with the knack, though to my recollection my grandma would disagree with that. I based my opinion on the fact that Nina worked as a haberdasher according to the census at the turn of the 19th century. Then she taught her daughter-in-law Evelyn a quilting pattern called the wedding ring. I think I would have liked her with all her creative flair, and I hope she would have liked me back, but it's really hard to say. I think my grandma was closer to her maternal grandmother Anna, who was around more often. She never said it, but a postcard from Anna to her makes me wonder if, a bit like me, she was ever so slightly favored. But maybe it was only that trend to which I can't remotely relate, the one where daughters are close to their mothers and their own daughters are close to them. Whatever their relationship, I suspect there was a wedge in the form of Anna's husband. My grandma called her father and his father strict and stubborn. By her measure, my father was just like them. What she called strict and stubborn, I call controlling and resistance to control. Semantics aside, strict and stubborn were not words she used to describe Anna's husband. Instead, she told me a story. Once upon a time, she tattled on her cousin, and her maternal grandfather broke a ruler, hitting her wrist as punishment. She told it in such an entertaining way I wouldn't have thought it hurt her. Besides, I understood. As a child, I often got into trouble for telling, you see, because my father didn't like the way that I told. It was too much, and I was slowly but surely being taught to shut up. We didn't use the A word when I was growing up. It was often called discipline, and more terrifyingly, it was sometimes called love. I haven't fully reckoned with this filing down of my person or the places that it's led me. But I think my grandma years ago, like Jesus in his parables, gave me something to hold on to. I am not alone. This is nothing new. I can get through this, and I will leave the light on for someone else. The thing about storytelling is it's not always direct. It's funny how we do it, every single one of us in this line, interpreting realities with our perceptions, and they're revealing a measure of truth. My mom always said my two grandmothers were the same, but I could never see it. To me, they were as different as two different things can be. I always felt like an intruder to my maternal grandmother. She didn't want to know me, I was told, and it seems like that was true, and so I didn't really want to know her. I had a dream about it once. I was in her house after she passed, and her ghost caught me there. We, the ghost and I, stared at each other without a word. I knew I shouldn't be there, and yet there I was. As above, so below. We were connected by nothing but mitochondrial DNA, and the gamete part of me formed with my mother inside of her. Even calling her what she wanted to be called by her grandchildren, Granny, feels too familiar for what we had, which was nothing. I feel nothing. What a contrast with my grandma. We had no reserve with each other, the woman with whom I shared my stories, and she her stories with me. When I found out I was being published, she was the first person I wanted to tell because of how much she believed in me. With everyone else, there was something to prove, but not with my grandma. She knew what I could do. But my mom insisted the two were alike, and she wasn't always entirely wrong. In fact, as I've grown older, I've come to see, in this case, she may have been mostly right. Both of my grandmothers were strong and strong-willed, domineering, assertive, and fiery. They were the types who had the final say, and what they said was how it was going to be. They were each subversive in their own ways, renegades in society and in their families. My maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Jane, was her family's baby until her father remarried. The only story I've heard about her in which she isn't cast as the villain was when she left home at 23 against her father's wishes. She joined the United States Army to aid in the Second World War. Her heroism faded as she fell for another soldier stationed with her at Camp Ritchie in Maryland. Rumor has it, after knowing him for only 6 weeks, they tied the knot and honeymooned in the Poconos before being deployed overseas. From everything I've heard, it was probably an ill-suited match, certainly an impulsive and ill-fated decision, for which Elizabeth Jane was almost entirely blamed. My mom's working theory, with which I disagree, was that her mother married her father only because she thought he had money. I think it's far more likely they both fell fast and hard in a time of uncertainty and decided to make it official without a thought towards longevity. I think Elizabeth thought it would be a partnership between equals, but that's seldom how these things play out, as most men expect to be center. By all appearances, she tried to give him what he'd been groomed to think was his due, while also holding on to herself. She birthed and raised 9 daughters, managing what we now call emotional labor, working as a nurse, and civically engaging in her husband's political campaigns. But the thing about women who try to balance it all is the weight makes one unsteady, and eventually it all crashes down. The load Elizabeth carried unequivocally landed on her girls. My grandma was the eldest, both in her immediate and extended families, and when her father made it clear she had to wait to marry my grandpa until his time serving in Korea was up, she did what she was told. But when her oldest son, my father, was born, she named him after herself, though she would insist his name was unique to him. Their names both mean warlike and are undeniably variants upon one another. When at last her 4 children were reared, she went to school and became an RN. I sometimes wonder what her father had to say about her midlife career. Bottom line, it shouldn't have mattered because my grandma did what she wanted and my grandpa didn't seem to mind. But I think she cared a lot about what her father thought, and I imagine she managed many things so he would never find out. It's not the thunderous burden raging over Elizabeth's daughters. No, it's subtle, like a python. But don't let its lack of venom fool you about its strength. It wraps around so gently you'll hardly know it's there, and if you try to get away too fast, it crushes you until there's no air. As different as their lives were, I think my grandmothers shared similar fears. One was afraid of being too little, the other of being too much. But where one grew larger over small steps in her life because she found a safe place to venture out, the other one was diminished because she was perceived as a threat. I confess I see them both in me and don't know what to do. I'm too impatient for the safe way out and too afraid of being cut down. By the time I turned 14, I was hellbound and determined to be as little like my mom Melissa as I could possibly be. It wasn't the usual mother-daughter stuff, though we certainly had our share of it. After all, I was a dreamer longing to soar, and she was pragmatic, keeping my feet on the ground. Add to that, she often assumed the worst in me and I the worst in her, but even that was eventually solved as I learned to have compassion for her and she in turn gained some for me. The thing that bothered me then, that still lodged under my skin, is that my mom was deeply unhappy doing what she did, and though it was at least partly her decision, she often took it out on us, her kids. I don't know how it happened exactly, but I know it's not who she'd been. Her yearbooks and her scrapbooks are full of things she'd done, things that when resurfaced during her illness, she admitted she'd forgotten about. Then in 1981, the end, full stop of all the things she'd been doing. She had 3 young children already, but I don't think it was motherhood. No, I think something else had come up by way of my father. His name was Bill Gothard, and like so many other alleged Christians, he taught that God hates women. He didn't use those exact words, of course. Instead, he put it like this: God loves women so much that he gave them voices and talents and brains, which he then made damnable rebellion to exercise, except in service of their husbands and children, and if unmarried, their fathers. My father swallowed this hook, line, and sinker. He was a man and it served him. But for some reason, my smart and capable mom went along. Maybe it was the best choice she had. But by the time I was old enough to remember, she was preaching it to others like it was good news, but her life at home preached to me how bad it really was. I didn't want to be her, but by my mid-20s, without realizing it, I was well on my way. One day, a man I was seeing got physical in public. It was my fault, something I'd done and said. I was trying to appease him when someone pulled me aside and told me there was no excuse for what he'd done. I didn't deserve it, and I certainly shouldn't accept it, not from anyone that I loved. I had become what he wanted and needed. God knows I would have given my life to keep him close. I was that way with everyone, not just with him. And the anger simmered inside me because they didn't know or care what I'd given up to be beside them. I try not to do that anymore, though sometimes I find myself slipping. Life is cold and lonely sometimes after all, but I've learned it's better to stand tall and alone than be held face down in the mud. I'll be like my mom in any other way, and in many other ways I am. I instinctively know how to comfort a child the way my mom held me after I'd had a tantrum in Sunday school one week. I didn't get a spanking as I fully expected. Instead, she rocked me and hummed. There's nothing I love more than watching kids be themselves, listening to them say the most off-the-wall things, coming in and saying, as my mom often did with me, well, that's not quite right, or else saying some off-the-wall thing myself. I can't hide what I'm thinking. My face is an open book. When I raise an eyebrow at you, I think you're an idiot. I say whatever and excuse me, and when someone cuts me off in traffic, I tell myself, as my mom once did, you can be right and still end up dead. I'm highly organized and I'm a compliance maven. I care about resolving things, preferably in black and white. I'll help anyone, any chance that I get, and most of all, I want to change the world. But I don't want her resentment for others that stems from decisions I've made. At 27, going on 28, my mom also made a decision never to do to her children what her mother did to her. Elizabeth Jane had come to the hospital after my mom had given birth to my second oldest brother and issued an ultimatum. My mom was to come home with her or she would no longer be her mother. My mom refused and my maternal grandmother earned her place as villain in the family history. She can't have really meant it because by the time I was born, we at least went for annual visits. My mom would talk to her mother while the rest of us sat by idly watching TV. What prompted this restoration, I really don't know. I know that it was uneasy and my mom never really felt that she had her mother back after that day in the hospital. Elizabeth Jane gave out ultimatums like they were business cards. Other daughters received them and it's rumored one ended her marriage. As a result, my mom avoided them like they were Black Death for years, both with my father and with us. Don't get me wrong, she said and did a lot of things that cut, bruised, and broke us. But the one thing she made sure we knew was that we would always be her children and she would always be our mom. Actually, though, the things bothering her exploded to the surface, for the first time directed at the source of her anger, the one who most needed to change. And if in that moment she hadn't have done exactly what her mother would do, the only one who had the power to help her might never have woken up, and she might not have made it through. I didn't know my maternal grandmother at all, so this next bit is pure speculation. But even taking wild jabs in the dark, you're bound to hit on something. If I didn't want to end up like my mom, and my mom didn't want to end up like hers, it stands to reason Elizabeth Jane didn't want to end up like her mother either. And how did her mother end up, you ask? Dead at 52 from diabetic shock. I don't know if it came on quick or if she'd been sick and ignoring it for a while. I don't know if she had access to insulin or if poverty or neglect prevented it. Elizabeth Jane was just 16 when her mother passed, and I can't help but wonder. The swift marriage to a man she was accused of marrying for money, the career nursing people to health and over the threshold of death, the grasps at control of her daughters. Maybe it was all about keeping the ones she loved safe and healthy and most importantly, alive. Maybe she didn't think she could do that if they weren't all close by. I'm not saying she went about it the right way with the threats and coercion, or that she should have gone about it at all. It backfired, leaving her and her daughter's relationships broken, unsteady, and strained in her wake. the opposite of what I guess she had hoped for. That I can understand. Empathy is a grace I can give her, and a grace I can give my mom, and a grace I can give myself when I'm the opposite of who I want to be. I truly believe my mom and maternal grandmother did what they knew to do with everything they were given. But then with the passage of time, you know more and can do different. For my part, I have learned I don't have to be caught on the pendulum of controlling others and being controlled. I can stand in the middle, own my person, my autonomy, my agency. If some people don't like it, won't like it, oh well, that's their right. But I will take steps for my healing. That's mine. They were singular. The women I come from, they persist now only in the parts of them that are parts of us. Gametes, mitochondrial DNA, memories and personalities, not wholly as they were, because none of us remember perfectly, and our perceptions are colored by individuality, sums and products of all who came before. The fact that I am from every single one, and every single one is part of me, fills me with wonder. Who, what, where I come from matter deeply, but something infinitely more important stirs in my mind. What's coming from me?